Thank you very much and welcome. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us this afternoon, early evening rather. I first read Shadows at Noon last year when the publishers very kindly sent the book over to me. It's a daunting book, it's a big book, but once I picked it up, I found it impossible to put it down. And believe me, I was done with it. I read it cover to cover within days of receiving it. It's very hard to sum up what the book is about, but very roughly it is about, amongst other things, the creation of India, Pakistan and Bangladesh. It is about what made us Indians, Pakistanis and Bangladeshis. And it is really just about who we are as South Asians, where we come from and where we might get to. I was really delighted. It's an extraordinary achievement, this book, and I was delighted when JLF invited me to be in conversation with Joya on the book merely months after I had read the book and so loved it. So thank you, JLF, and thank you, Joya, for being here and for writing Shadows at Noon. I would like to perhaps start by asking you about how you conceived of this book. The subject is something that's, you've been teaching and researching for ages. It is, of course, a scholarly work of history, but it's also in part a book of essays with elements of memoir thrown into it. Where did this book, what was the quest when you started on this book?
The quest, I guess the quest was twofold. One was to understand these three nations and their decolonization together, as opposed to separately in a combative way, as is normally the case. The other was to expand my own understanding of history into new fields that took me beyond partition studies, migration studies, and the fields in which I was comfortable, and basically to extend my range, as it were, well beyond where I was comfortable. So really to write a book that was a little bit harder for me than regular history books in a small comfort zone. So yeah, that was what I was seeking to do. And I was also seeking, I guess, to tell a political story about a region of decolonization in which it is assumed that there is constant war. And to say, actually, you know what? There's not as much war as you think, because that's what emerged from my years of teaching, from my years of research, and from my years of study. That's not what emerged. So I felt it important to tell the story.
And I'm glad you did. One of my favorite chapters from the book comes early on. And this is a chapter in which you talk about competing nationalisms with all their contradictions and their tussles that ended up shaping the freedom movement before the birth of the Republic. Could you talk a little bit about that chapter? I think it's extremely poignant, particularly in perhaps getting us to question the way in which we understand left and right ideologies in India today as binaries.
I mean, the point about it is that when we grew up, we was told that nationalism was one thing, and it was basically the national movement, and that it had led to the creation of India. When I grew up as a historian, I discovered that to be bogus, and that there were, in fact, like a rainbow hue of nationalisms in which there were different varieties, and that, in fact, these polarities were constantly shifting. There was a left and a right at one point, and then there was a Hindu left and Hindu right and a Hindu left, or there was a socialist left and a Congress right, and there was Swatantra Party and they were constantly shifting, and there were also regional nationalisms, which are important to take into account because they have framed the India we live in today. They have framed the creation of Bangladesh, which didn't exist before. So these are, the Baluchistan struggle, we have to account for that. So I think it's really important to understand that nationalism does not only exist at the level of the nation. It exists at a subnational level as well. And it's only if we understand this competing struggle for representation, to be heard, to be understood, to be respected, to have some level of representation at the state level, that we can actually understand the desire for respect, for safety within the nation. And that applies to Muslims in India, it applies to Hindus in Pakistan and in Bangladesh. So I think that's pretty much what I would say.
Jyoti, I think they'll need you to hold the mic a little closer for the next
Okay,
sorry. So building on that, I wonder what you make of nationalism. I mean, there's one part of it is that when we were growing up, we were led to believe that there was a monolith when it came to nationalism. But how has the popular idea of nationalism in India evolved over the decades?
I think that the state has tried to generate a popular idea, and that popular idea has been top-down generated through all kinds of means, like, for instance, at the most ridiculous level or grand level by institutions like the Republic Day parade, like, we are all this united, diverse nation, or at the most banal level by things like stamps or airmail letters or postcards or things suggesting that there's an inside and an outside, which we use all the time. We don't necessarily pay close attention to, but nonetheless are subliminally aware of and have grown aware of. The documentary film, these two are very critical because of the years before OTT channels, where you went to watch a film and you were subjected to these documentary films. And they weren't great necessarily, but you had to watch them, and you had to basically watch projections of the nation's future. And so willy-nilly, everywhere there were messages of the nation being thrown at you, and it was always the nation in singular. However many nations there were in practice, or national imaginaries there were in practice, you were being given a vision of the nation from above. So it's confusing for anyone to understand this process, and it takes a historian to really pick it apart. Is that enough?
Yes. We'll come back to this in any case later on. But talking of popular narratives, there is on the one hand the sense that India's place in the world as a rising economic superpower is quite secure, and on the other hand there seems to be this sort of anxiety about India losing or deviating from its core idea. And again, your book is wonderful because it just makes us question every single thing that has been thrust upon us from every ideological binary. In that vein, do you think that India ever had a core identity, and if so, is it easily definable?
I don't think India ever had a core identity, but that a core identity was constantly being trying to be fashioned for India. And that was always being challenged right from the get-go. So what we love to think of as the Nehruvian period was never really a Nehruvian period because, number one, the ideas that were being, that we fondly think of as Nehruvian, weren't really Nehru's ideas in the first place, or he didn't own the brand to those ideas. Some of them were ideas that were popular in what we then call the Third World, the New Third World. And some of them were ideas that were being generated by intellectuals in different universities at the time. And there was a kind of mix and match of ideas that became popular amongst a certain section of the literati. And Nehru, became a popularizer of these ideas. And now we think of those as Nehruvian ideas, but they never really were Nehruvian ideas. But that's the sort of, if you like, what came then. It was a global moment which we identify with as Nehru. And similarly, the Hindu right or the right wing is a global moment. Right now, being the extreme right everywhere is happening, whether you look at the US, or you look at Hungary, or you look at Turkey, or you look at India. Look around you. It's a moment, a global moment of the rise of right-wing power and right-wing imagination of the nation. So we have to have a global vision at the same time as we have to understand the subtleties of each national project and imagination. So I think that's where this book tries to make the reader think and understand that nationalism is not simply about the nation. It's about these constant tensions and struggle and trying to make nationalism capture the imagination of people and never really succeeding. So it just tries harder and harder and harder. I mean, it's taken 100 years for, say, Hindutva to capture the idea of the Hindu right in any serious way. After all, it was the 1920s where you have the rise of the RSS. And where are we now, 2024? And, take a look at how long it's taken. So it really has taken time and effort for these ideas to grow and, actually grip hold of people's imaginations. And they have evolved and fought and developed new strategies and built temples and done all sorts of things in their efforts to do so. Likewise, so-called Nehruvian ideas, which are not Nehruvian, have done the same. So we must understand these as massive, century-long projects, not just as small bites of history. These are huge bites of history. And we need to understand them as such, I believe, and that's what I've tried to show in the book.
You speak about how, part of the success of the Nehruvian idea, and by success I loosely mean the fact that it was triumphant in a way. The Nehruvian idea of India in that moment had to do with where the world was at that point in time. Is that the only factor? I wonder how you look upon the sort of fault lines back then, and what might have been certain catalysts that led to when we look back now, we think it was, fait accompli. It was always going to be Nehru's idea of India, but was it inevitable? And in that, I think, when I think about the way you open your book by talking about the Surat Congress conference, and I wonder how you, from there on to Nehru, what you make of what happened.
I think it was anything but a fait accompli. I think that Gandhi's completely untimely and hideous assassination in 1948 led to a complete switch of direction of the nation, which would have otherwise become a Hindu right-wing nation in 1948, long before Pakistan had become a Muslim right-wing nation. So, you know, these sudden assassinations, which I've tried to draw attention to in the book, have led to swings in directions of the countries that we have considered that actually change the balance or direction of in which each country is moving. So I think that it's important to consider this as well. It was absolutely not a fait accompli, because after all, the liberal literati that supported Nehru was a small thing. And equally, the merchant groups that supported the right wing were a small bunch. It was even Stevens as to who was going to win. And you commit one murder, and popular pressure moves in another direction. So that's what happened after Gandhi's murder. I mean, it was just gone. The Hindu movement was gone at that time and didn't really return until the 80s.
Well, that is one of the many perhaps enduring legacies of Gandhi. This one, not something that that was rather tragic and unfortunate. But we live in extremely polarized times. And again, one of the popular sort of ways in which we classify where we belong politically is to say, are we with Gandhi or are we with Gandhi's assassin? I mean, you'll hear that line plenty. And the reason we should be reading books like yours is because they take us away from these very limiting ways of thinking. You present a very nuanced portrait of Gandhi and of Godse, if I may say. And I think that it's really important to think about Gandhi's critique, because he himself would have probably been first in line to reevaluate his own ideas and legacy. He always thought that personal and social character building was the vehicle to political change. What is the relevance of his ideas today, given how large he looms over our idea of ourselves as a nation, as the father of the nation? What is the actual relevance of his ideas today?
Please don't be shocked by my answer, and please don't come and attack me in hordes. I'm a wheelchair-bound person. I'll play on that idea. But basically, I think there's very little impact of Gandhi on us today. I think probably the only significant impact that Gandhi has on Indians today is our proclivity to strikes and acts of non-cooperation, and our belief that we have a moral and ethical right to do this, even though it's illegal in a constitutional democracy. And we've done it again and again and again and again and again and again. And this is, if you like, a residue of Gandhian practice. And somehow we've incorporated this into our kind of political practice, and we don't see anything wrong with it. I mean, the emergency started with JP's strike. We've seen recent examples of it with Anna Hazare's strike. And it's like we even do it in our own small ways in our little institutions. So it's probably the thing that it's given us a tool in which we can protest without resorting to, if you like, taking to the streets. Although we're quite fond of taking to the streets too. At least I have been quite fond of taking to the streets too. But I think beyond that, Gandhian ideas, because Gandhian ideas are very difficult to understand, Gandhian ideas haven't really caught on that much. I think people really don't understand what Gandhian ideas are. Most scholars don't even understand what Gandhian ideas are.
You know, you refer to two periods of authoritarianism in the trajectory of Indian, modern contemporary Indian history. And again, one of the things that we're wont to hear is that we are living in the third republic of India. I wonder what you think the markers are of this republic, and how deep do you think democracy runs in India for the threat to be more poignant, as some would argue, at this point in time?
Now, again, please don't throw potatoes at me, but I don't think that at any time since independence, India has ever truly been a republic, and that just the assimilation of states and the raising of rubber line, with the rubber you raise out certain lines on a map, doesn't change the structures on the ground into republican structures. It doesn't work like that in history. So I don't think there was ever a republic at all. And that what we are now seeing is that the republic is getting, republican ideals are kind of getting more and more eroded. But they were never really that committed to republicanism. I mean, republicanism was declared in the context of republicanism vis-a-vis the British sovereignty, not vis-a-vis our own Indian sovereigns. So, who are we a republic about, What kind of republic is this? I don't think anyone has really thought that question through, and it's high time they did. And in that sense, it's not really a question of whether it's the first, second, or third. It's a question of what kind, and what stage of development is this at. I mean, if you have in 1991 a prime minister, democratically elected, who is a Raja of Manda, VP Singh. You tell me, are we a republic? What are we? So I think it's a very complex question, the question of are we a republic? And it's not easy for me to give you a snip-snap answer as to whether we are a republic at all, or we're more a republic now. My own feeling is that we're less a republic now. But that's only because the way in which parties are incorporating more and more openly sovereigns, what used to be sovereigns and are actually still sovereigns, into politics now than they did in the past, in the age of Nehru.
I wonder how, you said that we've never really been a republic, and you talked about, do you think the project of becoming a republic was always a flawed one, or did we lose our way somewhere along the line?
I think the project of becoming a republic was always, basically, it had one goal, which was to say, hang on, Mr. British King, we are no longer, or Miss British Queen, we are no longer doing your bidding. In that sense, we are a republic. It wasn't about sorting out our own affairs and redesigning our country according to republican values. We have never done that. Never, ever done that. So republican values have no purchase in our society or in our politics. So I really find this talk of a first, second, third, fourth, or fifth republic to be a little superficial in historical terms.
We've spoken about, before we move on from the foundational moment, we've spoken about Nehru and Gandhi, and perhaps it would be amiss not to bring up Ambedkar and caste, because caste is such a uniquely South Asian phenomenon, and it's often compared to race, but obviously that's inadequate. In fact, the proper understanding of caste eludes most of us, even as Indians who live amidst it and the phenomena. What do you see as the role of caste in shaping the Indian polity and democracy?
Where does one begin? It's probably the most important factor. Which is why I'm saying we can't talk about republicanism when we have such a thing like caste, and we haven't actually done anything about it. You know, Mandal Commission comes from a Raja. You know, it's a most strange thing. And actually, the disaggregation of caste is coming so gradually with these extremely reluctant concessions to this caste being made OBC or that caste being made OBC, and this whole congregation of castes being made OBC, and then that will probably become a super caste, and then that will become a caste that votes this way or that way, you know? And there's that factor, the political factor of caste, and then there's the other social justice aspect of caste, which is just beyond the pale, beyond imagination. It's beyond the comprehension of people like you and me. We can't even imagine what it's like to be. I come from a Brahmin family, and I can't imagine what it's like to say. I mean, I say that I wasn't aware of caste because I didn't experience caste until, you know, I experienced caste being fought out between two other people, one of whom was a dome, or was described as a dome. I never had actually seen caste before. And you don't actually experience caste unless you are of a so-called low caste. And I don't think you can even really understand it deeply and profoundly without that experience or knowledge. And what I've tried to do in this book is give you some sense of that experience through food. Because that's the only way in which I can give you. I, as a middle-class professor of a Brahmin background, how can I give you the experience of caste when I don't really have that experience? I can give it to you through the description of food, because caste endogamy, caste commensality, these are common things. Eating together, not being allowed to touch certain foods, you know, not being allowed these things, not being given water, not being allowed to a well. These are practical things that people have to do when they belong to certain castes. These things I can show you about caste, but I can't tell you the experience. You have to hear it from their ears. So, I mean, which is why I chose the lens of food. Because otherwise I have no lens. I have no locus standi, I mean, is a way of putting it, you know?
You know what, whatever we are talking about in the context of Shadows at Noon is really just the tip of the iceberg. We are essentially addressing questions from the first few chapters, and it goes really beyond talking about the creation of India, Pakistan, Bangladesh. It talks about, like I said, who we are as a people. And Joya uses multiple lenses of entertainment, of cinema, and perhaps one of the most discussed and talked about chapters is the one that she's referring to, which is on food, fasting, and feasting. And one of the things you so wonderfully do, like you said, is use food to explore what it really means to be an outcast or a lower caste person in India. But you also use the lens of food to explore the larger South Asian identity. It seems to allow you to get into many, many interesting places. Could you talk a little bit about what this aspect opened up for you as a historian?
I saw beyond caste, which it took me a long time to get over. I began to see things like the assembly of cookbooks, above all the role of women in the assembly of cookbooks, regional cookbooks, and then the creation of India through cookbooks. So nation creation through cookbooks was something that I discovered, and then South Asian creation through cookbooks was also something that one found. But Madhur Jaffrey emerged as a hero in my book because, after all, who has not used a Madhur Jaffrey recipe, whether they're in India or in the diaspora or anywhere? And they don't have to be an Indian. They can be a Bangladeshi or a Pakistani. But, you have to use your Madhur Jaffrey recipe sometime for some party or something. So she is cookbooks are an important thing. I also use the idea of changing food to indicate changing social habits, changing patterns, and this idea of how vegetarian cuisine changes is very interesting to me, because vegetarianism obviously has a caste aspect to it, and vegetarianism changes dramatically. And you have, for instance, the emergence of, I think I've described it in the book, of vegetarian biryani. Now, vegetarian biryani is not a biryani, technically speaking, but you have it sold in buckets at airports and, dhabas and whatnot. But it becomes almost the most popular dish in the subcontinent, in the Indian part of the subcontinent, in the vegetarian areas. So it's really interesting to think about these shifts of popularity of certain foods and of how they have evolved, and how one cuisine, say Hyderabadi cuisine, has affected North Indian cuisine, or how there's been this melding and mixing of cuisines in India post-independence, and how there's a competition between regions for excellence in cuisine, and there's endless things you can talk about. That chapter is the longest chapter in the book, so I just didn't know where to end it, because I could have gone on and on and on and on. It's so revealing, food, about society.
Perhaps it'll lead to a book of its own, but
no.
One can hope. But, Joya, I think your work is, at least to my mind, and I'm sure many people will agree, essential to understanding India's partition experience. I wonder if you think that partition was inevitable. I also wonder if you think it was a historical mistake.
I don't think partition was inevitable because, I mean, basically, partly because history doesn't work like that. I mean, you don't work backwards from an event and see all events as moving seamlessly towards that event. And you can clearly see, I can clearly see opportunities that were missed to make partition, to avert partition. You can clearly see the Lucknow Pact, you can clearly see the Sapru Report as being opportunities at which a different formation could have been created, right? What was your second question?
Do you think of it as a historical mistake?
This is a harder one. I do think of it as a historical tragedy, in fact, one of the biggest tragedies in history, certainly one of the biggest tragedies of this 20th century. And the 20th century is very big on tragedy. But I do think of it as a terrible mistake. But obviously, some of the countries that were born on the other side of the border, in a way, don't necessarily always see it as a tragedy. They may, some people may, and some people may not, because those who are very nationally minded might say, well, if it hadn't been for partition, our nation wouldn't have been born. So there are complex ways of seeing it in different parts of the world. I mean, many people on our side of the country see it as a tragedy. I mean, of the subcontinent, see it as an unmitigated tragedy, whereas there are different ways of seeing it around the subcontinent. I see it as a tragedy. And I see it as its tragic impact on so many people, in so many lives, in so many places. Yeah, I mean, I've been obsessed with it, with the tragedy.
If it is a mistake, is it easy to ascribe blame in this context?
It's so complex. I mean, it's very easy to pin blame on this party or that party. I mean, it's a hasty decolonization where the British don't want to stay. They want to get out as fast as possible out of India, which they can see is not controllable anymore. You can blame the Congress, which is not really wants to get its grip on India as soon as possible and doesn't want the Muslim territories anymore because it doesn't have control over the Muslim territories. And you can blame the Muslims for being uncontrollable. I mean, it's one of those blame games that you can keep playing. But the thing is, why did it get to that point in the first place is because you missed the opportunities along the way. And I think in missing those opportunities, probably if there is a party to blame, it's a Congress that is to be blamed, not Jinnah, who's the favorite whipping boy. It's actually the Congress to be blamed. Jinnah created the opportunities. Congress somehow pulled them apart. So that's why it's a bit sad to say that our lovely Congress, whom we hope will save us, save the situation now, hasn't had a lovely purest past. There's no pure past.
There's no pure past.
Yeah.
But partition did happen, and you write so wonderfully about the official nationalisms that were to follow. And you spoke about it a bit at the beginning of our talk with respect to India. But there was this task at hand of having competing nationalisms to create Pakistanis and Bangladeshis and Indians out of people who had, in fact, a shared complex identity. Could you talk a little bit about this?
Yes, this is one of the main themes of the book, because suddenly where you had one British Raj, you have first two nations forming, and then you have three nations forming, and suddenly you have, instead of creating national identity, which you had never succeeded with in the first place, you now have to create nation-state affiliation, which is a very hard thing to achieve, because how do you create an affiliation with things which people don't know what it means for them? People know that, oh my God, I can't see my relatives again because they're now left on the other side of the border, and people know that, oh my God, I can't, I can't go to that shrine because I can't visit that gurdwara, and that means a lot to me. So there's a lot of things that people value, but they don't know how to value a nation state, which actually doesn't mean so much to them. So there's a project of trying to make people believe in the nation state as something above everything else. And I mean, some other historian has described this as a form of civic religion, to turn the nation state into God itself. And to make us all into believers. But it's very hard, and so they haven't succeeded. And some of us who remain unbelievers, and some of us, we watch a lot of movies which are selling the idea, and we become believers. And a lot of us just don't. We have our doubts as to whether this idea of the nation is really what it seems. It seems different from here, it seems different from there, and so I think the idea of the nation just keeps being reworked all the time. And what we are now seeing is a new version of the idea of the nation. And now we are being told that actually the nation means this. It means basically a Hindu nation, and we should all be very happy and grateful that we've got this Hindu nation which is rooted in, I don't know, 30, 40,000 years old, and it's a restored cultural glory. So we should be very happy. Now this is a new form of nation building, and which is trying to persuade us all that we should be grateful for this nation. We should treat this nation like God. But nations are not gods, and nor can they ever be, because there will always be critical minds who will say, not sure about this one, not sure I believe it. Actually, I'm pretty against it. I actually think I like the earlier version. I actually think this bit could be reformed. So nation building is hard work, and it has constantly been hard work for all three nations. If you just look at the extent to which the three nations have tried and failed to establish regular form of nation building with two-party system or whatever, they haven't. They're still trying.
We talked a little bit about what the present moment in India's politics tells us about its foundation and what kind of light it sheds on where we were at the foundation of the Republic. So just to close out, I'd also like to talk about Pakistan and Bangladesh in the same vein, and luckily for us, Bangladesh has just had an election and Pakistan is due to have its elections in a couple of days. When you see what went on with these two elections, what kind of light does it shed on the trajectories that these two countries put themselves on?
I mean, I think you'll find that if you actually study the nation of Pakistan and Bangladesh, I think you'll find that there are actually more democracy practiced in them than you realize. And that Pakistan had a very late constitution, whereas India's constitution was adopted in 1950. Pakistan's constitution wasn't adopted until 1956. And then shortly after that, you had a military coup. But there have been many periods of democracy in Pakistan. Likewise, you have had many periods of democracy in Bangladesh. So it's different, but it's not wildly so. It is disappointing that you had only one party contest the elections in Bangladesh this time. It is very disappointing that Imran Khan was jailed. Whether he would have made a difference to the outcome of the elections, I'm not sure, because I understand that his party has really dwindled. I think the Indian election is really the one that's going to be decisive for the future of the subcontinent and where things go for the subcontinent, not just for India, but for the subcontinent as a whole.
We have a couple of minutes. Maybe we can take 2 odd questions if there are any from the audience. Okay, I'm going to urge you, we really have just 2 minutes to keep your questions very, very short and very succinct. We'll take 2 together and then you can answer them both, yes? Yeah. We'll take 2 together. You can pick one from this side and one from the other side.
Hello. Hello?
Yes.
Yeah. Actually, hello. Actually, there are, Madam, while speaking, you said that the only impression that Gandhi had was on strikes and unshans. But I think you are just thinking it too little. Gandhi was the unquestioned leader of the national movement. And all the strategies that were planned by the Congress party was on the basis of the Gandhi's thoughts only. It was Mahatma Gandhi who all alone went and attended the round table conference. So how can you say that Gandhi's impression is only as far as the unshan and the strikes are concerned, number one. Number two, just small thing, that you say that the Hindu Rashtra was stopped because Gandhi was assassinated and only after 30 years it started again surfaced. But what I would like to say here is that it would not be possible because Pandit Nehru was at the helm of affairs and he was there for 15 years. And a person like Nehru, who was a great follower of secularism, and not only Nehru, it was Nehru, Ambedkar, the entire Constituent Assembly, which had huge luminaries, one of the best minds in the country. All of them decided in favor of secularism. It has been so well ingrained in our system that it's very difficult to uproot it. So I don't see that.
So your question is why she makes
how
that argument. Understood. Exactly. Thank you. Can we have one more question from this end, please?
What is the meaning of republic? As for you, what is the meaning?
Excellent. Thank you.
Should I respond to both? To the gentleman on that side, as I understood, Pragya was asking about the legacy of Gandhiji, and I was saying about the legacy of Gandhiji into the period that we are in now. There is very little legacy remaining of Gandhiji into the period we are in now. You may not feel so. This is my feeling, that actually very few of us follow Gandhian ideals, but the only ideals that are commonly followed are in these areas of action that we take, forms of action that we take against what we see as injustice. Of course, Gandhi was, there's no question, and that's written in the book. That's all is written in the book. And as for Nehru's dominance in the Constitutional Assembly, I'm afraid, sir, in the Congress Party, I'm afraid, sir, it's not quite as you see it. Because there were, Purushottam Das Tandon was also very dominant, and he was from the Hindu right. And so there was a very strong contest between the two wings of the Congress. Eventually, after Gandhi's death, Nehru won, but the members of the Hindu right remained very powerful in the provinces. So Nehru didn't have his own way, just calmly for 15 years. That's not the case. It's not the case. The facts, the sources prove that that's not the case. So that's my answer to you. And about republicanism, I mean a form of government or an idea that sees that there should be no king or sovereign ruler in the country. So I'm answering your question, right? And I'm just taking the second question. So there should be no king, queen, etc., and that there should be a government which is elected by, which should be run in some other form, not by a king or a queen. It could be run by democracy, it could be run by socialism, it should be run by something, but not by a king or queen. That is republicanism. Now, when we call this a third or fourth Indian republic, we are technically a republic, but at the point where we declared ourselves to a republic in the Constitution, the republic we were looking at was the King or Queen of England. We were declaring ourselves free from the King or Queen of England because they wanted us to stay in the Commonwealth and to remain, subservient to them in the Commonwealth, which India refused to do, Pakistan also refused to do. We became a republic then in that context. Whether we became republicans in our own right is a different question. And on that second question, I have some doubts.
That's all we have time for. I'm afraid the timer has stopped and I cannot overrule. They're already on the stage, but the books are available, and I promise you whatever questions come to your mind will be answered by the book. Joya will be signing books as well, so pick your copy and get it signed by her. Thank you for being such a wonderful audience. Thank you for speaking with me, Joya.
Thank you for your questions.